The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Assembly was the largest room Han Do-yun had ever stood in. It stretched upward like the inside of a mountain, with thousands of seats carved into the walls in wide circles, each row higher than the last. Every seat was filled. 400 species from across the galaxy sat watching, their translators humming softly in the air, turning every word into something each of them could understand. Do-yun stood at the bottom. That was where Earth's seat was, the lowest tier, the spot they gave to species that had not yet proven themselves. 41 years Earth had held that seat, and in 41 years it had never been moved. He adjusted the collar of his gray uniform. Gray was the color they gave provisional members. Every other delegation wore colors of their choosing. Earth wore gray. He had made this walk before. Every year for the last 7 years, Do-yun had climbed down to the central podium and delivered Earth's petition for elevated membership. Every year, the answer had been no. But this year, he had something different to say. This year, the data was on his side. He reached the podium and placed his hands flat on the surface. The chamber quieted, not out of respect, out of habit. Honored delegates, Do-yun began. His voice was steady. I speak once again on behalf of Earth and the United Human Government. I am here to present our petition for elevated status within this assembly. He activated the display behind him. Numbers, dates, records. In the past 41 years, Earth has signed and honored every treaty offered to us. Every single one. We have shared our medical research freely with over 60 species. Our doctors currently serve on 14 colony worlds, treating diseases that local systems cannot handle. Our disaster relief teams responded to emergencies on Pelori, Molkari, and Zenith territories, saving an estimated 400,000 lives in the last decade alone. He paused. The chamber was quiet, but not the quiet of attention. It was the quiet of waiting for him to finish. We have met every requirement for elevation, Do-yun said. We have contributed more per capita than any provisional member in the Assembly's recorded history. We ask, respectfully, that this body recognize our contributions and grant Earth the standing it has earned. He stepped back from the podium. The display flickered off. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Voran Hesk stood up. Hesk was tall even by Pelori standards. His pale blue skin caught the chamber lights, and his 4 eyes blinked one pair at a time. He was the senior speaker of the Pelori Dominion, and he had held that title for longer than most humans had been alive. When he spoke, the chamber listened. Ambassador Han, Hesk said, his voice booming through the translation system. Once again, you come before this body with your lists and your numbers, and once again, I must remind you of something your species seems unable to accept. He spread his long arms wide. You are children. Your civilization is barely 1,000 years old, if we are generous with the counting. You split atoms and nearly burned your own world. You poisoned your oceans. You fought wars among yourselves for resources you had in abundance. He paused, and his lower eyes narrowed. And now you stand here, asking to sit among species that mastered the stars before your kind learned to plant seeds in dirt. Laughter. It started in the Pelori section, but it spread. The Molkari delegates made their rattling sound that passed for amusement. The Ulani clicked their jaws. Even species Do-yun had never spoken to joined in. The sound filled the chamber like water filling a bowl. Hesk was not finished. We should be grateful, I think, that you are here at all. We allowed you a seat. We gave you access to our trade routes and our technology. What more do you want? A throne? More laughter. Louder now. Do-yun stood at the podium and did not move. His face showed nothing. He had practiced that face in the mirror for years. Not the expression of someone who did not care, but the expression of someone who was taking careful notes. The chairwoman, Ulani Den, sat in the highest seat of the chamber. She was ancient. Her species lived for centuries, and she had served as chairwoman for longer than Earth had been a member. She watched the laughter with a thin, flat expression. She did not call for order. She did not speak. When the noise finally died, she simply said, "The assembly will now vote." The vote took less than 2 minutes. Earth's petition was denied. 387 to 4. The 4 votes in favor came from species so small and powerless that their support meant nothing. Doyun collected his documents and walked back to Earth's seat. He sat down, placed his hands on his knees, and waited until the session ended. Then he walked out. His quarters on the station were small. 1 room, 1 window. Provisional members did not get much. He sat at his desk and opened a secure communication channel. It took 14 seconds to connect across the galaxy, bouncing through relays that the assembly monitored. But Doyun was not using the assembly's relays. He was using one of Earth's own. The face of Quan Teho appeared on the screen. Teho was director of Earth's Off-World Intelligence Bureau. He was a quiet man with tired eyes and a habit of listening longer than most people were comfortable with. "How did it go?" Teho asked, though his tone said he already knew. "They laughed again," Doyun said. Teho nodded slowly. He looked down at something off screen, then back. "How loud?" "Loud enough." There was a pause, the kind of pause that carried the weight of years of planning. "Then we moved to Phase 2, Teho said. Doyun did not respond right away. He turned in his chair and looked out the small window. Somewhere out there, past 1,000 unfamiliar stars, was a tiny yellow dot. Home. 8 billion people who had worked and built and bled and been told, again and again, that they were not enough. He reached up and removed the assembly pin from his collar, the small gray circle with the provisional member's mark. He held it in his palm for a moment, then set it down on the desk. "Phase 2, he said quietly. The channel closed. The room was dark. Outside the window, the galaxy turned slowly, full of species who had laughed today and would not be laughing much longer. Doyun sat in the silence and waited for what was coming next. 6 weeks after the vote, the rain had not stopped in Sejong City. It came down in gray sheets over the government quarter, drumming on the rooftops and flooding the gutters. Somewhere beneath the streets, 40 meters underground, Secretary General Bei Juan sat at the head of a long table and listened to things that made him want to break something. The room was called the Deep Hall. It had no windows. The walls were reinforced concrete, lined with signal-blocking material. Nothing said inside this room would ever leave it unless someone in this room chose to carry it out. There were 6 people at the table. Juan sat at the head. To his left sat Han Doyun, freshly returned from the assembly station, still carrying the tiredness of the journey in his face. Beside Doyun sat Admiral Yoon Hana, straight-backed and sharp-eyed, her black uniform pressed to perfection. Across from them sat Director Quan Teho and Chief Engineer Shin Nari. At the far end, a military aide stood with a sealed folder, waiting to be needed. Teho was the first to speak. He stood and activated a wall display. What appeared was not a chart or a graph. It was a list, a very long list. This is every treaty Earth has signed with the Galactic Assembly since first contact, Teho said. His voice was flat and calm, the way a doctor might describe a disease. 41 years, 116 agreements. I have had my people go through every single one of them, word by word. He touched the screen and the list began to highlight. Red lines appeared through document after document. Out of 116 treaties, 89 contain terms that are unfavorable to Earth, in ways that were not made clear at signing. 31 of those contain clauses that directly violate the Assembly's own fairness codes. And 12 were amended after Earth signed them, without our knowledge or consent. The room was silent. Juwan's fingers tightened around his pen. Teho continued. The trade agreements are designed so that Earth exports raw materials at fixed prices while importing finished goods at market rates. The difference is enormous. Over 4 decades, the estimated value extracted from Earth through these agreements is roughly 800 trillion credits. That money went to the Pelori Dominion, the Mulkari Union, and the Assembly's Central Fund. He changed the display. The defense pacts are worse. Earth is required to provide soldiers, ships, and medical personnel for any Assembly-declared conflict. In the last 41 years, Earth has been called upon 17 times. We sent people every time. Some of them did not come back. He paused. In the same period, Earth requested defensive assistance, twice. Once during the Fringe Colony raids, and once during the asteroid crisis near Mars. Both requests were denied. The Assembly cited procedural delays. Admiral Yoon Hana's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The technology sharing agreements allow the Assembly to access all of Earth's research freely. In return, Earth receives access to a limited library of approved alien technology, most of which is 2 or 3 generations behind what the Assembly's senior members actually use. Teho turned off the display. In summary, we have been giving everything and receiving almost nothing. By design. This was never a partnership. This was a harvest. The silence that followed was the kind that presses on your chest. Juwan spoke first. You said by design. You mean they planned this from the beginning? The structure of provisional membership is identical for every younger species, Teho said. We are simply the latest. Juwan looked at Doyun. You sat in that chamber for 7 years. Did you know all of this? Doyun met his eyes. I suspected. I did not have proof. Now I do. Juwan turned to Shin Nari. She had been quiet the entire time, sitting with her hands folded, her dark eyes watching the room with the patience of someone who builds things for a living. Tell me about Blackthread, Juwan said. Nari stood. She was not tall, but when she spoke, the room shrank around her. Project Blackthread began 10 years ago, she said. It started as a research initiative, officially classified as a deep space sensor development program. In reality, it was something else entirely. She pulled up a new display, schematics, engine designs, shield frequencies, communications architecture. We took every piece of technology the Assembly shared with us. We studied it. And then, we built something better. She pointed to the first schematic. This is our new faster-than-light drive. It is 60% faster than anything currently in the Assembly's fleet and uses half the energy. This, she pointed to the next image, is our adaptive shielding system. It reads incoming weapon signatures and adjusts in real time. Nothing in the known galaxy can do this. She moved to the third schematic. This is our fleet coordination system, an artificial intelligence network that links every human ship into a single fighting force. Each ship thinks for itself, but they move together like one body. And this, she pointed to the last display, is our independent communications network. It does not use Assembly relays. It cannot be monitored, blocked, or shut down by anyone outside our system. The room was very still. Her voice was low and precise, like a blade being drawn. The Assembly believes our fleet consists of 42 registered vessels, she said. That is what the treaties allow. What the Assembly does not know is that we have been building a second fleet for the past 8 years. It is housed in deep solar orbit, inside hollowed asteroids, beneath the surface of moons, in places no one ever thought to look. She paused. 214 ships. Every one of them carrying Nari's technology. Every one of them crewed and ready. Juwan leaned back in his chair. He was not a military man. He was a politician, a negotiator, a man who had spent his career believing that patience and dialogue could solve anything. But he was also a man who had just been told that his people had been robbed for 4 decades while being laughed at for asking to be treated fairly. He looked around the table, at Doyen, who had endured the laughter, at Teho, who had uncovered the theft, at Nari, who had built the answer, at Hana, who would deliver it. "If we do this," Juan said slowly, "is there any going back?" Nobody answered. That was answer enough. Juan picked up his pen. In front of him was a single document. It had no title, only a code. Operation Sovereign Dawn. He signed it. The pen scratched against the paper, and it sounded like a door closing. "Pull our people home," he said. "All of them. Quietly. Reduce communications to automated responses only. No explanations. No announcements." He stood up. "Let them enjoy the silence. They will miss our voices soon enough." Within the week, Earth went quiet. Diplomats returned home on routine transports. Trade ships changed their routes without explanation. Messages to the assembly became short, polite, and empty. The galaxy noticed, but only barely. Earth was small. Earth was provisional. Earth was not worth watching. That was the mistake. 3 months of silence was all it took for the galaxy to forget about Earth. The assembly moved on. New trade deals were signed. Old arguments between the Pelori and the Mulkari flared up and cooled down again. The empty gray seat on the lowest tier gathered dust, and nobody thought twice about it. Then Han Do-yoon walked back into the Grand Chamber. He did not announce his arrival. He did not request time on the schedule. He simply appeared at the entrance of the chamber floor during an open session, and began walking toward the central podium. The delegates noticed him one by one. Conversations died. Translators hummed, then went quiet. Do-yoon looked different. He was not wearing the gray uniform of a provisional member. He was wearing black. Plain, undecorated black. No assembly pin. No identification badge. Just a man in dark clothing, walking calmly to the center of the most powerful room in the galaxy. Chairwoman Ulani Den watched him from her high seat. Her ancient eyes narrowed slightly, but she did not stop him. Curiosity, perhaps, or something else. Do-yoon reached the podium. He set down a single data tablet. He did not greet the chamber. He did not thank anyone for the opportunity to speak. He simply began. "The United Human Government wishes to make a formal announcement to this assembly," he said. His voice carried clearly through the vast room. "Effective immediately, Earth is withdrawing from every treaty, agreement, pact, and accord it has signed with this body." The chamber did not react at first. The words were so unexpected that most translators had to repeat them. A low rumble of voices, growing louder, spreading across the tiers. Do-yoon continued, as if the room were empty. "Treaty of Provisional Membership, signed 41 years ago, terminated." He looked down at his tablet. "General Trade Agreement, covering resource exchange between Earth and Assembly member states, terminated. The terms of this agreement fixed Earth's export prices at 30% below galactic market value, while charging full price for imports. This is a violation of the Assembly's own Trade Fairness Code, Section 12. He swiped to the next page. Mutual Defense Pact, terminated. Under this agreement, Earth provided military support to Assembly operations 17 times. Earth's 2 requests for assistance were denied on procedural grounds that do not exist in the original document. They were invented after the fact. The noise in the chamber was getting louder, but Do-yoon's voice cut through it. Technology Sharing Accord, terminated. Earth shared all research openly. In return, Earth received access to a restricted library containing technology that was already 3 generations obsolete at the time of signing. Meanwhile, Earth's own contributions were distributed to senior member states without limitation or compensation. He went on. Agreement after agreement. Mining rights, migration protocols, communications access, scientific cooperation, disaster response obligations. Each one was named, its violations cited with specific evidence, and then formally terminated. The legal work was precise and devastating. Every clause, every loophole, every quiet manipulation that had been hidden inside complex language was dragged into the open and laid bare. By the time Doyon finished, he had terminated 116 agreements. The chamber was no longer rumbling, it was roaring. Voron Hesk was on his feet. His 4 eyes were wide, and his pale blue skin had darkened with anger. "This is a tantrum," he shouted, his voice booming over the noise. "A childish tantrum from a childish species. You cannot simply walk away from your obligations." Doyon looked up at him. "We have no obligations. As of this moment, we have no agreements with this body. We are not walking away from anything. We are simply leaving what was never fair." Garo Tiv, the Molkari trade minister, stood next. His voice was calmer than Hesk's, but there was an edge to it. "You understand that there will be economic consequences. Earth's trade routes pass through assembly-controlled space. Your ships use our relay stations. Your colonies depend on our supply chains." "Our colonies have been self-sufficient for 6 months, Doyon said. "Our ships no longer use your relays, and our trade routes have been rerouted." Tiv sat down slowly. The color had drained from his face. Chairwoman Den leaned forward in her high seat. "Ambassador Han," she said. Her voice was thin and careful. "Withdrawal from assembly treaties carries consequences. This body has mechanisms for enforcement." Doyon met her gaze across the vast distance of the chamber. "Earth is not asking for permission," he said. He picked up his tablet, turned, and walked out of the chamber. He did not look back. Within hours, the consequences of Earth's withdrawal began to ripple across the galaxy. On the Pelori border world of Ekin, the human medical team that had been running the colony's only advanced hospital packed their equipment and left on a transport that had been waiting in orbit for 2 weeks. The colony's governor sent urgent messages to the assembly asking for replacement doctors. The assembly had none to send. Human medicine was not easily replaced. The diseases that Earth's doctors had been treating did not pause to wait for politics. On 3 Molkari refueling stations, the supply of refined isotopes stopped arriving. These isotopes were processed by human engineers on a jointly claimed asteroid belt. The engineers were gone. The processing equipment had been dismantled and shipped back to Earth's solar system. The Molkari had never learned the refinement process themselves. They had never needed to. The humans had always done it. Deep in assembly-controlled space, 17 communication relay stations that had been maintained by human technicians went dark one after another. The assembly's own engineers scrambled to restore them, only to discover that the software running the relays had been written by humans and was now cleanly uninstalled. Not corrupted, not sabotaged, simply removed, as neatly as folding a blanket and taking it home. An assembly peacekeeping fleet, stationed near a disputed border, discovered that its coordination network, the system that allowed 40 ships to move and fight as one, had stopped working. The software had been developed by a human contractor under a technology sharing agreement. That agreement no longer existed, and the software had included a clause that no one had ever read, allowing for removal upon termination. One by one, systems that had quietly depended on human hands, human minds, and human work began to fail. Not dramatically, not with explosions or chaos. They simply stopped, the way a machine stops when someone unplugs it. The assembly had spent 41 years treating Earth as a minor presence, a provisional member, a species to be used and mocked and kept in its place. They had never stopped to ask what would happen if Earth left. Now they knew. In his quarters on the station, Han Do-yoon sat alone. His shuttle back to Earth would depart in the morning. His work here was finished. On his desk was a small gray circle, the provisional member's pin he had removed months ago. He picked it up, turned it over in his fingers, and then dropped it into the waste bin. The galaxy was quiet tonight, but it would not be quiet for long. Voron Hesk had never been told no, not once in his long life. He had served the Pelori Dominion for over 2 centuries, and in that time he had watched dozens of younger species rise, stumble, and fall back into line. It was the natural order. The old ruled, the young obeyed. That was how the galaxy worked, and Hesk had never seen a reason to question it. So when Earth walked out of the assembly, Hesk did not feel fear. He felt anger. The kind of anger that comes from a parent watching a child slam a door. It took him 1 week to convince the assembly to authorize a response. He stood before the delegates and called it a diplomatic enforcement action. The language was soft, but the meaning was clear. 40 warships would travel to Earth's solar system, park themselves in orbit, and wait. No threats would be spoken. None needed to be. The sight of 40 Pelori cruisers hanging in your sky had a way of changing minds. It had worked on the Drali. It would work on the humans. The fleet assembled near the assembly station and made the jump to faster-than-light travel within 3 days. Commander Orath, a veteran Pelori officer with more combat experience than most species had history, led the formation. He was calm and professional. This was routine. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, far beyond the orbit of the outermost planet. The first thing Orath noticed was the silence. No defense satellites, no patrol ships, no warning beacons, nothing. He ran a full scan. The system appeared almost empty. A handful of civilian transports near the inner planets, some mining equipment on an asteroid belt, a few old orbital stations around Earth's moon. That was all. Orath opened a channel to Hesk, who was watching from the assembly station. "The system is undefended," he reported. "No military presence detected. I recommend we proceed to the inner system." Hesk smiled. Proceed. The fleet moved inward, 40 ships in a wide formation, engines running at standard speed. They passed the ice worlds at the edge of the system without incident. They crossed the empty space beyond the gas giants. Everything was quiet. At the orbit of Neptune, a signal reached every ship in the fleet simultaneously. It was not a weapon, it was a voice. A woman's voice, speaking in clear, unaccented Common Galactic, broadcast on every frequency, in every known language at the same time. "Attention, unidentified fleet. You are entering sovereign human space. You are not invited. You have not been given permission. You will go no further. This is Admiral Yoon Hana of the United Earth Defense Fleet. Turn your ships around and leave the way you came." Orath listened to the message twice. Then he laughed. He had heard threats before. He had heard them from species with real fleets and real weapons. Earth had neither, as far as he knew. "Continue forward," he ordered. The fleet crossed Neptune's orbit, then the orbit of Uranus, then Saturn. The ringed giant watched them pass in silence. At the orbit of Jupiter, every system on every ship in the Pelori fleet shut down at exactly the same moment. There was no explosion, no flash of light, no impact. 1 second, the ships were running at full power, and the next second, they were dead. Engines off, shields off, weapons off, communications off. Life support dropped to emergency backup, which ran on isolated chemical batteries and could not be remotely disabled. The crews would live, but they could not move, could not fight, and could not call for help. 40 warships drifted in the dark, like stones dropped in water. On the bridge of his command ship, Orath grabbed the edge of his console as the gravity systems flickered. Emergency lighting turned the room red. His officers were shouting, running diagnostics, trying to restart systems that would not respond. Nothing worked. "What happened?" Orath demanded. No one could answer, because no one had ever seen anything like this. The pulse had come from 12 hidden platforms buried deep inside the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars. They had been placed there 4 years ago by Shinari's engineering teams, disguised as dead rocks among millions of other dead rocks. The disruption field they generated was something entirely new, a focused electromagnetic wave that targeted and neutralized the specific power frequencies used by Assembly's standard technology. It shut down everything that ran on those frequencies. Human technology, built on completely different architecture, was unaffected. For 3 minutes, the Polari fleet drifted in silence. Then the darkness around them began to change. From behind the moons of Jupiter, from within the asteroid belt, from beneath the surface of dwarf planets that the Assembly's maps listed as barren and dead. One by one, then in groups, then in waves, human warships appeared out of nothing. They did not decloak like ships in stories. There was no shimmer, no dramatic reveal. They simply turned on their systems and let themselves be seen, like someone stepping out of a shadow. 214 ships, each one sleek, angular, and built with technology that made the Polari cruisers look like museum relics. They moved in perfect unison, spreading out around the drifted fleet in a sphere of silent, shining metal. Not one of them fired. Not one of them even powered its weapons visibly. They simply surrounded the Polari and waited. On the command ship, Orath stared at his dead sensors, then looked out the viewport with his own eyes. Dozens of human ships, each one reflecting the distant light of Earth's sun, hanging motionless around his fleet like a net drawn tight. Then the communication system crackled. Just the short-range receiver, powered by the emergency backup. A voice came through, the same woman's voice from before. "Commander," said Admiral Yunhana, "your ships will be repaired and returned to you. Your crews will not be harmed. Not one person on your fleet will be touched. We are not your enemies, and we have no desire to destroy you." A pause. "But you will carry a message back to the Assembly. Tell them what you have seen here today. Tell them that Earth is no longer provisional. Tell them we are no longer asking for a seat at their table. And tell them that the next fleet that enters our space without invitation will not be treated so gently." The channel closed. Over the next 6 hours, human engineering teams boarded each Polari ship. They were efficient. They repaired the systems they had disabled, replaced components that had been damaged by the pulse, and even restocked emergency supplies that had been depleted. They worked in silence, asked no questions, and accepted no thanks. When it was done, the Polari fleet powered up and turned toward the edge of the system. Orath gave no order to fight, no order to resist. He simply looked out at the hundreds of human ships, still watching from every direction, and he gave the only order that made sense. "Take us home," he said. The fleet left Earth's solar system in a single, quiet line. Not one shot had been fired. Not one life had been lost. And every officer on every ship knew, with absolute certainty, that this had been a choice. The humans could have destroyed them. The humans had the power, the technology, and the reason. They had chosen not to. 2 months after the Polari fleet limped home in silence, the galaxy was a different place. The story of what happened near Jupiter spread faster than any official report could contain it. Orath did not need to tell anyone. His crews told their families told their neighbors, the neighboring systems told their trade partners. Within a week, every corner of the galaxy knew that 40 Polari warships had been disabled without a single shot, surrounded by a fleet that was not supposed to exist, and sent home with their systems repaired and their pride in ruins. The Polari Dominion was the first to crack. Voran Hesk, the loudest voice in the Assembly, the one who had called humanity a half-evolved curiosity, was stripped of his title by his own government. The Pelori High Council released a quiet statement saying that Hesk's approach to interspecies relations no longer reflected the values of the Dominion. Hesk had led them into a humiliation so complete that his name had become a joke, and the Pelori did not tolerate jokes at their expense. The Mulcari Union was next. Their energy crisis had not improved. Without human-refined full isotopes, 3 of their major shipyards had gone cold. Trade Minister Garotiv, who had once threatened Earth with economic retaliation, sent a private message to the United Human Government requesting an emergency meeting. The message was polite, almost pleading. Earth responded that they would be happy to discuss a new arrangement, on new terms, at a time and place of Earth's choosing. But the most unexpected change came from the bottom of the assembly, not the top. The smaller species, the ones who had always been too weak or too new to challenge the old powers, began reaching out to Earth through back channels. The Zenith, who had been bullied into unfair mining contracts decades ago. The Drali, whose technology had been taken under similar sharing agreements. The Vora, whose homeworld had been gerrymandered into a resource zone for Pelori corporations. One by one, quietly, they sent the same message. We saw what you did, and we want to talk. In Sejong City, Secretary General Bei Juan read these messages in his office each morning. He read them carefully, one at a time, and each one made him sit a little straighter. On the assembly station, Chairwoman Ulani Den sat in her high seat and watched her institution come apart at the seams. She had held this position for longer than most species in the chamber had existed. She had seen empires rise and crumble. She had watched the assembly grow from a small coalition into the dominant body of galactic governance, and she had watched it become something ugly along the way, a machine that fed on the weak and rewarded the strong and called it order. She had known. She had simply decided, long ago, that this was how things had to be. Now she was not so sure. She requested a private meeting with Han Doyun. Not through official channels, not through diplomatic protocols. She sent a personal message, handwritten in her own language, which Doyun would have to translate himself. It said simply, "Come and talk." Doyun came. He arrived at the station on a human transport, dressed again in plain black, and walked through the corridors that he had walked 100 times before. But the corridors felt different now. The delegates he passed did not laugh. Some of them stepped aside. A few nodded. Den received him in her private chamber, a round room at the very top of the station, with windows that looked out in every direction. She was old. Her skin was thin and gray, and her hands trembled slightly when she moved them. But her eyes were sharp, and when she looked at Doyen, he could see something in them that he had never seen before. Something close to honesty. "I will not waste your time with pleasantries," Den said. "I know what the assembly did to your people. I knew while it was happening. I allowed it." Doyen sat across from her and said nothing. He let her speak. "The assembly was built by old species," Den continued. "Species that had already mastered the stars when your ancestors were learning to use fire. The system was designed to maintain a hierarchy, the old on top, the new on the bottom. It was not accidental. It was architecture." She paused. "Your species was meant to be used, just as others were before you. I told myself it was necessary, that the galaxy needed order, and order required sacrifice." She folded her trembling hands together. "I was wrong." Doyen studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Earth does not want to rule the assembly," he said. "We have no interest in becoming what the Pelori were. We did not build our fleet to conquer. We built it so that no one could force us to kneel." Den nodded slowly. "Then what do you want?" Den asked. "A new system," Doyun said. "Open technology sharing, real sharing, not the kind where one side gives and the other takes. Defense agreements that are genuinely mutual, where every member protects every other member, or the agreement means nothing. trade terms audited by an independent body that answers to no single species, and seats in this assembly based on what a species contributes, not on how old it is. He leaned forward. And an end to what was done to us. No more provisional tiers. No more gray uniforms. No more laughing at the new ones because they are new. Outside the windows, the stars turned slowly. "And if the assembly refuses?" she asked. Do-Yun smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in this story, and it was not a smile of triumph or cruelty. It was the smile of a man who had been carrying a heavy thing for a long time, and had finally set it down. "Then the assembly will become irrelevant," he said, "because we are not the only ones who were laughed at, and they are already standing with us." Den closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked older than before, but she also looked, for the first time, relieved. "Then let us begin," she said. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy shifted. Not with war, not with fire, with something quieter and more powerful. In Sejong City, Bei Juan stood before the people of Earth and delivered an address that was broadcast to every human settlement in the galaxy. He told them that the days of bowing were over, that Earth would stand on its own terms, deal fairly with those who dealt fairly in return, and never again accept a seat below anyone. In a shipyard orbiting Mars, Shin Nari watched the launch of the Horizon, Earth's first deep space exploration vessel, built entirely with human technology. It was not a warship. It was something better, a ship built to go further than anyone had gone before, carrying scientists and engineers and dreamers. Nari stood at the observation window and watched it slide into the dark, and she allowed herself a small private moment of pride. On the bridge of the flagship Resolve, Admiral Yoon Hana looked out at a formation of ships that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Human vessels flew alongside Zenith cruisers, Drali scouts, and Vora transports. They were not a conquering army. They were the beginning of something new. An alliance built not on fear or exploitation, but on a simple idea, that every species deserved to stand upright. In his office, deep beneath the government quarter, Kwon Tae-ho read the latest intelligence reports. The assembly's internal structure was fracturing. More species were demanding reform. The Pelori were in disarray. The Molkari were negotiating. And the smaller species, the forgotten ones, the laughed-at ones, were finding their voices for the first time. And in the grand chamber of the Galactic Assembly, something had changed. The lowest tier, the one where Earth had sat for 41 years, had been removed. In its place, at the center of the chamber floor, stood a new table. It was round. It had no tiers, no high seats and low seats, no gray uniforms and colored uniforms, just a table where anyone could sit. Han Do-Yun was the first to take a seat. He sat down, folded his hands, and waited. A Zenith delegate joined him, then a Vora elder. Then others, from species whose names most of the galaxy had never bothered to learn. They sat at the round table, and they looked up at the tiered seats above them, where the old powers watched in silence. Not everyone came down. Not yet. But enough did. Do-Yun looked around the table at the faces of species who had been mocked, exploited, and ignored, just as Earth had been. He nodded to each of them. They nodded back. Outside the station, the stars burned the way they always had, indifferent to the small creatures who sailed between them. But something was different now. For the first time in a very long time, the creatures at the table were looking at each other as equals. They had laughed at Earth. They would never make that mistake again.